Okay. So, hello, Harriet. How are you doing?
Hey, I'm doing well, thanks, Dom.
Good. Well, it's lovely to see you. It's been a long time. So, for those that don't know who you are, can you introduce yourself and tell me a little bit about what you do, please?
My name is Harriet Sugarcookie, and I've done quite a lot of things in my time, honestly. Some people will probably know me way back from my Reddit days. I used to post on Reddit a lot, but Reddit was much smaller back then. And then from there, I moved to camming, and I did camming for a while.
Mm.
And then I started my own blog site, my own pay site, and that turned into more than a blog for a while, which was really interesting. And then I kind of took a step back more recently in recent years. I kind of I moved all the way from Europe to America, and just been sort of getting my foot in America, so to speak. And now I run a management agency for models and creators that work predominantly in the sex industry.
Okay, fantastic. And for those, before we move on to the ADHD stuff, which is what we're here to discuss today, if somebody wants to find out more about your work, where can they find you? What links have you got to share?
The best way to find me is probably on Twitter. That's where I'm most active. It's I think it's twitter.com/H, the letter H, and then sugar cookie,
Okay.
I think, but I'll have to double check that. But yeah, Twitter, Instagram shadow banned me a long time ago, so that doesn't really work. So yeah, Twitter's the best bet.
Okay, cool. So they can find out more stuff about you from there. Well, so the reason why we've come together today, we've known each other for a long time, so I've been running Wobbling About and Rocking Out for a couple of years, talking about mental health and disability stuff, but because of a recent diagnosis in ADHD and a kind of desire to understand more about it, I decided to do this series and working with musicians, artists, creatives that I know through my time at Southsphere and elsewhere. And you talk about ADHD and diagnosis and challenges and things like that. And you, of course, have done some wonderful things in your life, and I'm very proud to call you a friend. But I wanted to talk to you today about ADHD and your diagnosis and how that affects you. So, first question is, when did you first get diagnosed, and how was that process for you?
I think I was diagnosed back in what's the month before April?
Uh, I have to think March,
March.
March, yeah.
March, yes. I got diagnosed back in March. It was after a couple of appointments. I was actually seeing a therapist, psychologist, I can't really remember which, but COVID and the pandemic has been pretty hard on a lot of people, myself
Mm,
included. And I thought, this is time that I should actually go and get some help,
mm,
just to make it through. And it was hard because I just moved to this other country, and things work very differently in America than they do in
mm,
England. So it was hard to navigate. And after a few sessions, they were like, you should really look into getting, a more expert like
mm.
not diagnosis, but a more expert consultation on this. And then I did, and that's when I was given the diagnosis of ADHD, and more specifically the inattentive type, because I think a
Yeah,
lot of people don't realize there's like more than one type of ADHD.
yeah, absolutely. And what was that like for you in terms of, because you've lived a very full life before that. Obviously, it was a very recent diagnosis. What was it like to get that diagnosis for you? Did it trigger anything for you? Did it make you? How did it make you feel? I guess.
There were very complicated feelings,
Mm,
honestly. There were certainly feelings of like, aha, that explains this and that,
yeah.
which I think a lot of people who come to have these diagnoses realize, oh,
Mm,
wow, these things that I've been living with all my life, now that there's a name to it, it seems so obvious. But at
mm,
the time, these things were considered failures to me, or they were
mm,
obstacles in my
yeah.
life that I just thought, wow, life is so hard. On the other hand, there were also feelings of it's so frustrating that it took so long. I
Mm,
know, we were speaking about it for some time, and they were saying it's more likely that girls will get the inattentive
mhm,
type, And it's also more likely that it will go undiagnosed in your early years, because back then, I'm not sure about now, obviously, but back
Mm,
when I was younger, or in the primary school age, I
mm,
suppose, they were only really looking for that hyperactivity that you mostly see in boys.
yeah.
Um, so there was like a sort of feeling of frustration that perhaps, we could have gotten like help earlier. It would have helped my family as well as myself.
Mm,
But the field was too, I, I'm not sure the word narrow-minded is right, but like they were looking in a very narrow spectrum
yeah.
back then. So there was definitely feelings of frustrations there. And then there was also feelings of, I suppose, fear. There was this feelings of like, oh my God, there really was something wrong with me. As
Mm,
much as it can feel like a relief, there's also this feeling of like, oh my God, I have an actual defectivity. I don't know if that's the
mm.
word. I mean, it's not, and you shouldn't feel that way,
A
but
difference, yeah, like a difference.
yeah, you shouldn't feel like you're defective, but that's not to say that that wasn't an initial thought I had, like a gut reaction of like, oh my God, there is something wrong with me.
Mm, mm.
um so yeah, it was very complicated feelings.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I can imagine. And obviously, as someone that has, again, we've talked a little bit about this before, but public perception wise, you've come across very confident. And I know you to be that. But in terms of your public persona, people would say, oh, confidence, etc. However, it must have been quite challenging to reach out to actually make those first steps, to look at this diagnosis and to seek that. What were the biggest challenges for you to actually go and make contact and actually, again, because some people are scared of therapy, some people are scared of even seeking that level of help. Was that difficult for you to do, or was it something that you were just like, this needs to happen, I need to do this?
I think, I mean, I'll be honest, my journey with therapy has not been easy. And I
Mm,
think a lot of people who don't understand what therapy is think that you start therapy and then you'll suddenly get these magic answers, so to speak, that
mm,
suddenly like weights will be lifted off and you'll be happier and better.
mm,
And that's just, I don't think that's true. I think therapy is a very long journey. And I think part of it is just finding someone that is a good match for you. There
mm,
are so many types of therapists out there, and they have different approaches and different
mm,
styles. And finding one that works with you, finding one that you can even be open and vulnerable with to begin with, is like such a huge and hard step of the process.
mm,
And it's expensive. I think people don't realize that there's this level of accessibility and privilege that comes with being
mm,
able to afford to look around. I mean, especially in America where I am, we're looking at $150 per session here.
mm,
And if
mm.
you meet someone and they don't fit with you, then you're like, okay, that's $150. Then you have to meet another one and like start the whole thing. And it's just more and more money. So that's really, really difficult. I actually started my journey with online therapy since everything
Mm,
was in pandemic lockdown.
mm.
And it was a disaster. Oh, such a disaster.
Okay.
Um, and I definitely after a while, I had these feelings of like, this isn't worth it. This isn't helping me. I'm just
Mm,
wasting money. I'm wasting time. It's actually,
mm,
in some ways, more emotionally traumatic.
mm.
Um, but I just had to remind myself like why I reached out in the first place, which was I'm not okay.
Yeah.
As much as I can put on a front, as much as I can be publicly saying I'm okay, the one person I don't want to lie to is myself.
Mm, mm,
So even if it's for work or for a show of strength, I'm okay with saying to people like, I'm doing good, I'll get through this.
mm,
But I never want to, if I have to like ask myself in the mirror like, hey, are we actually good? Like,
mm.
if I want to be able to say to myself like, you know what, I'm not okay and I think I need help.
Yeah, absolutely.
um so yeah, admitting it to yourself, I think, is the most important step.
Mm, mm.
And whether or not you tell other people that you're looking for help is really none of their business. And I think that helps me because I'm a very private person in that way.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I appreciate you, taking the time to share that stuff with me. I think in terms of, you obviously, reached out for help and you got your diagnosis.
Mhm.
and you obviously have that knowledge now. How has that knowledge informed how you sort of treat yourself now? Do you know what I mean? Because you mentioned it was like, okay, I can now understand how I feel about maybe that explains
I
that from
think
then.
I think something that I personally find very fascinating about the whole thing is coping mechanisms that people
Mm,
create. Especially when you go undiagnosed for your whole life, you have this obstacle, you have this way that your mind works, and you can't seem to budget, so people make workarounds for it. And it's very interesting to see just how deeply ingrained into my life my coping mechanisms were or are. I don't think they'll ever change, even knowing my own diagnosis. So
mm,
as part of my ADHD, I have an extremely hard time following audio and conversations. I actually find conversations, audio, videos really
yeah.
hard. Video tutorials on YouTube, just I can't
Mm,
get a grasp on them at all. Like, and I know a lot of people who are the opposite. They can only really study if they have someone talking to them.
mm, mm,
So for me, I always wondered, like, even if I'm interested in a subject, even if I'm fully invested in a person in front of me, when they start talking, I find it really hard to fully grasp onto the conversation.
mm,
I constantly feel like my mind wandering away,
mm,
or like I'm straining, and I feel like I can hear the words, but I can't listen to the words.
mm,
And that my coping mechanism manifested itself in me being a voracious reader. Like, I can understand words if I read them, like
mm,
if they are down on a page. So I spent, my whole childhood just devouring books and reading and reading and reading. And then you'll see, the part of my career that really was probably one of the biggest was when I was blogging and writing articles.
mm,
And again, that was because I was like, for my work, I was spending all this time researching and reading and then writing, because that was the way that I could most understand the world.
absolutely. And I mean that focus obviously allowed you to achieve these goals for yourself. Well, I guess in terms of your advice for anybody else, again, people that are maybe afraid, and then this is the reason why one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you today is because again, the public persona of what Harriet Sugarcookie is one thing, but in fact, you and you are every bit of that confident and an
Mm.
ambassador for various things, but perception is a lot to a lot of people, whether you're living in Los Angeles or whether you're living in Manchester or wherever.
Right.
um, what advice would you give to somebody who is worried about what people are going to think, worried about what people are going to say, worried about their perception, family or otherwise, if they go for this diagnosis, if they take this risk, as you realized it was time to do that, and some other people might do that, but they might be afraid of the consequences. What advice and tips have you got for those types of for those people that are struggling with?
So, like I said, I'm very private about this stuff. I don't deny it or anything like
Mm,
that, but I don't sort of post about it a lot on
mm,
social
mm,
media. I don't really bring, attention to it. And for me, this is because the person I was, before the diagnosis, and the person I was immediately after being given the diagnosis, was at the end of the day the same person.
mm,
Having a name given to the experiences I had up until then didn't fundamentally change who I was as a person. The person that had ADHD and had their life affected by it, that has been and will be me the entire time.
mm, mm,
And I think the thing the diagnosis really helps with moving forward is that now there's a name to that obstacle that's in your
mm,
mind. There's a
mm.
name to the feelings of frustrations or the walls that you've encountered again and again.
Yeah.
And this time, because you have that name, you have this power to look for solutions, to like reach out, and you don't even have to talk to anyone. You can be like, okay, knowing that this is caused by, ADHD, I can Google, what happens with this and how do
Mm,
people deal with that? And it's just letting me have the ability to find better solutions or better workarounds or better
mm,
coping mechanisms, and just having this sort of vast wealth of knowledge open,
mm.
because I haven't fundamentally changed as a person,
No.
but my ability to tackle challenges in future has opened up
Mm.
because now I have a name to the monster I'm fighting, so to speak.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's a really good analogy there. And I think, in terms of if you're comfortable sharing, what's a really prominent example that you can give me of where, where when you got the diagnosis and when you did your research, because again, I know that's a huge part of
Right.
you, where you were like, okay, so this is like a sigh of relief. You're like, I understand that now. I feel better. I can cope with that and I can learn from it more importantly.
Right. So one thing that I always really hated about myself was that I always thought I was just a really lazy slob. My
Mm,
room would always be a mess. And frankly, half the time it still is, like, just
mm,
really messy, things thrown about. There's no rhyme or reason to where I put things. And I would constantly be thinking, oh, where is that thing? I saw it just the other day.
mm,
And if I ever tidied up, I would be like, well, now I have no idea where anything is. When everything was on the floor, I knew exactly where on the floor it might have been. So I just really thought, I'm such a slob. This is disgusting. How can I live with just piles of
mm,
clothes like this? Um, but reading up on it, it's like it's very normal. And what I realized was what happens is, I mean, tidying up is boring for one thing. And it's so easy to get distracted. You're putting something away, you pick up a notepad that had some notes that you scribbled on a few weeks ago, and you think, oh my God, that was such a good idea. And then you're like, I should follow up on this, or you pick up a piece of clothing and you think, oh, this was when I went out with so and so and I haven't spoken to them in a while, and I should go, and you all these things that you're trying to tidy up with reminders of tasks that you may have started and may have abandoned, and then suddenly you have this insane desire to continue it, and
mm.
then you get lost in the mess, I suppose. And I was reading up and seeing other people, like, yes, I also feel this way, yes, my room is also like this, and then people were sharing how they combat that. How do you become tidier, how do you like stay on top of the disorganization? And there were lots of different ways, and I tried a bunch. Some didn't work and some worked, and for me now it really comes down to just blasting music and thinking, and really just focusing on dancing to the music, dancing and singing along to music. So my job isn't tidying up.
Mm,
That's just something I'm doing whilst I dance and sing. So it's like
mm,
an enjoyable event of, like, I'm just taking this time to really enjoy some music. Maybe, this artist I like brought out a new album and I really want to just listen to it. And whilst I'm listening to it, I'm also pottering around my room and putting things away.
mm,
And the thing that was distracting me the most was when I looked at an item and my mind went to where that item, like whatever story that item reminded me, whatever
mm,
task that item reminded me of. And instead of like looking at item and thinking, oh, this is when this happened, I would instead really focus on the music instead. So I
yeah,
was kind of looking through the item so I could put it away.
yeah,
And that's really helped me and made me realize, like, I'm not a natural slob.
yeah,
Like, I don't enjoy living in mess. I'm not, dirty like that. It's just I get so easily distracted.
yeah.
So I really need, I guess you can say, the music and the dancing is my anchor to not get distracted whilst I get this job done.
Absolutely. Do you have any, out of curiosity, because music's been a huge part of both of our lives? Do you have any favorite songs when you're trying to focus? Well,
Honestly, I mix between classic rock like Meatloaf,
yeah,
like the Bad Out of Hell 2 album is one of my go-tos, because
yeah,
I really feel that you can blast that one. You can
yes,
get
yeah,
so into singing the ballads. And then I also really like, and this is specifically for tidying up, I really like cheesy 80s songs, like 80s pop songs, because I mean, more modern songs, like, you know, maybe they have like more interesting beats, like I'm really into rap. It's harder for me to get into it to sing along. So I
Mm,
really need music that, one, I know like the back of my hand, and two, I enjoy singing along to. And then that helps me feel more immersed in it, which
mm,
I can't do with, say, you know, like the latest hip hop stuff, because I can't rap along and it's not really
yeah,
the same. So I really need songs that just fully get me immersed. So yeah, a lot of Meatloaf, a lot of 80s. I do Elton John some days.
nice, nice,
Um,
awesome.
so yeah, anything like that.
Cool. There's some good examples there, and a couple more questions now. I heard once somebody said to me that ADHD is a little bit like a curse sometimes, but it's also a bit like a superpower because you can focus. You can, well, sometimes you can focus, sometimes you can't, but you can um, it can really help you in some ways in terms of your drive, in terms of analyzing different things like that. And I mean, it works differently for different people. But has there been a time where you've looked at ADHD and researched it and gone, oh, actually, that's really helped me? Because obviously you've started businesses. Yeah, I've known you to start businesses. I've known you to travel the world. I've known you to meet different people from all over the place. And I wonder if there is anything that you can kind of go, okay, yeah, my ADHD has helped me with that.
I would say that I don't know if I would ever put it down and say it was the ADHD that helped me
Mm,
with that,
mm,
honestly. But I do know I'm impulsive.
mm,
A lot
mm,
of things in my life, a lot of travel I've done, a lot of holidays I've taken, heck, even my partner and how we got together, it's all been very impulsive. Um, so that might have something to do with it. If I get an idea and I think, you know what, this sounds like fun, or this could be good, like, let's just do it. What's the worst that could happen? That's been my, I've definitely thought that way a lot.
mm.
The only difference is like that you have to be very confident in the consequences.
Yes.
um a lot of people, when it comes to impulsiveness, they want to do it something because it sounds good, but they're not particularly ready to take the consequences if it doesn't work out.
Mm,
Like
mm,
I've always been very clear to myself, like, okay, let's say I do this impulsive trip to so and so. If things go bad at home or work, or like, you know, I have to do this or that, like I'm mentally prepared to face the
mm,
consequences
mm,
should they arise before I decide to do it.
mm.
um so that's probably my biggest advice on that one. I don't know if the ADHD helped, but it's definitely made my life more interesting through my impulsiveness. But as a person, I've also learned to be very clear with myself as to where impulsiveness leads, and to
Mm.
just be responsible for the consequences. And I'm not saying they're always bad, but I go into it, I make the choice knowing that there are
Yeah,
risks.
yeah, that's interesting. I can certainly relate to that for sure. And I think in terms of, you know, again, advice and support for anybody else, obviously, you know, different people are going to
Mhm.
be dealing with different things, and you've given some good tips as well. But in terms of somebody else who, if you could speak to any of your, we'll say the word followers in inverted
Yeah.
commas for those that are listening to this, it's I'm doing the air quotes thing. For anybody that follows Harriet Sugarcookie and takes inspiration from you, and obviously, you know, can resonate with any of this, what is your advice for them, you know, in kind of, you know, taking the steps that you took, making that you know, making that jump, if that's the correct
Mm.
phrase, into seeking help, getting support?
Hmm.
Put you on the spot.
You don't have to tell anyone.
Mm, okay. Yeah.
I know that sounds like a weird piece of advice to say, but there is this fear from a lot of people that if people find out that you got diagnosed, or if people find out that you're looking for therapy or help, that you'll be seen as weak. And
Mm,
as much as I can tell those people, like, it's not weak, you're not
mm,
weak, that doesn't always help. So all I can say is that you don't have to tell anyone.
mm,
You know, getting help is for you and for yourself,
mm,
and you never have to disclose that. I would say telling some people, like your close friends and people you truly trust, it felt like a weight had been lifted. It felt
Mm,
like you could get support. I
mm,
recommend it, but you don't have to. If the thing stopping you from getting help is fear of perception of other people, you have to realize that when it comes down to it, this is a deeply personal business between you and yourself, and no one else is owed the knowledge.
mm,
Like you
mm,
don't owe other people to tell them. So you don't have to if you
mm.
don't want to, but you can. And I personally think you should with like close friends.
Yeah.
um but that, I think that's it for me. Like when I took the steps, I was very private about it. I was very scared, and I know I could have told my friends and they would have been really supportive, but I really wanted to make the steps myself, and if I didn't like the results, I was going to just be like, I'm no one will ever have to know. That's what I was telling myself.
Yeah.
Like maybe if things go badly, it'll be a thing that happened and no one will know that I messed up. I
Yeah.
did something silly once. And that's just how I got myself to have that courage to go and see.
Mm, mm, absolutely, I think that's a good message. Outside of because obviously the ADHD thing is one thing, but in terms of what you've been able to do with your career, and you've built a following of people that support you and have got behind you. As we finish off now, what is your
Mm.
message? Obviously, move it. Obviously, you have a message for people that might be looking for a diagnosis and things like that, which we've just covered. But in terms of your message for those people that have supported you through your work and through your life, and have followed you and got behind you, financially or otherwise, what is your message as we finish off today for those people that have supported you and will continue to support you as you go forward in your career?
Thank you for supporting me. I swear to God, I have no idea what I'm doing. And I haven't for the last 10 years, but you've been along with me this far. So please continue to support me as I continue to have no idea what the hell I'm doing. Because ultimately, at least we're having fun, right?
Absolutely, 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 Harriet. Well, thank you very much for your time. I could continue on for hours with you. I love catching up with you. It's been wonderful. Obviously, everybody listening, do continue to follow and support Harriet. And yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Cool, right.